We got it.
And you are live.
Okay, we are live. So I am convening the Common Council Ordinance Committee regular meeting. It's July 20th, 2021. It is 7:02. And I will call the roll. When I say your name, please indicate that you're here. David Hoovelman,
Present.
Dominique Johnson, Tom Keegan,
Here.
Tom Livingston,
Here.
Kadeem Roberts.
Present.
Manny Langella has not joined us as of yet, and I'm Lisa Shanahan, the chair. So tonight we have 4 quick public hearings that I will go through each of the 4, and then we'll begin with the first one. We're going to discuss and vote on Chapter 37, Article 2, Section 3710, which is the definition of polystyrene food service products. Then we're going to discuss and vote on Chapter 38, Article 2, Firework and Firecrackers, Section 38.7 through 38.13. And then it does say that we're going to discuss and vote on Chapter 30, which is the Capital Programs Project Program, possible merger of Planning and Zoning Commissions, as well as discuss and vote on Chapter 79, Planning and Zoning Commissions, possible merger of the two. We will not be voting tonight. We, as everybody might remember from our last meeting, we decided that we wanted to have the public hearing in July when we thought more residents would be in town before the holiday season starts. So, the summer holiday season. So we will take comments for those 2 matters, but we won't be voting tonight whether to send it on to the Common Council. So
Lisa, just let me know when the comments are ready. I have 3 comments about it. They're all talking about Chapter 30 and 79. So I'll just read them when the first one comes up.
Okay, great. Well, let's start at the top, which is discuss and vote on Chapter 37, Article 2, Section 3710, definition of polystyrene food service products. So I'd like to open the public hearing on that. Is there anybody here present to speak on that matter? Brian, are you able to see if people are raising their hands? Or if there's participants who want to be heard?
I don't see any, but Anthony might be able to tell you.
Yeah, Anthony, you see anybody's hand raised?
I don't see any hand raised, but we do have people from the public. So if you would like to.
I just saw one hand raised. It looks like it's the phone number that ends in 537.
Yes.
So if you can allow that person to speak, if they'd like to talk at this time.
Yes, you have the floor, and you can unmute by doing #9.
So whoever's on the phone, yeah, great, okay.
You unmute with *6. Thank you for, this is Diane Lauricella. I think this is a very reasonable addition to the that particular chapter. And I wanted to suggest that there be a plan to do some public education and outreach about the addition, but also about the original very good and well-needed item. So thank you very much. That's all I wanted to say, that I'm in support of it, the additions, and I would ask that that there be a consideration by council and staff to do some public outreach in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lucella. Is there anybody else who would like to be heard on Chapter 37, Article 2, Section 3710? And then Diane, if you wouldn't mind putting your hand down just in case we want to know whether or not you want to be heard on another matter. Okay, so the next thing the next matter we'll ask for public comment would be Chapter 38, Article 2, Fireworks and Firecrackers, Section 38-7 and 3813. So if there's anybody who would like to make public comment at this time on the fireworks ordinance, please raise your hand. Diane, your hand's still raised. Do you want to be heard again, or are you? You've got your hand still raised from before. I'm taking that as a no.
Lisa, before we go on any further, there's apparently a question and answer, and at 7:06 p.m. Professor Kipp sent looks like a message. I don't need to speak, but I am a scientist. And if anyone has any questions about polystyrene or need help with educational, I am available, just so everyone's aware. in case they didn't
Okay,
see
that's
that.
great. And we know Professor Kipp because she sits on the tree or advisory committee, and we rely on her expertise a lot. So that's great to know. Professor Kipp, thank you for letting us know, and we will definitely be coming back to you. All right, so let the record show that there was nobody who wanted to speak to the fireworks ordinance. And now we're going to do discuss and vote on Chapter 30, possible merger of the Planning and Zoning Commissions. And I guess, do you want to read those comments now, Brian? We might as well. We know that they apply to both Chapter 30 and to Chapter 79.
Right, so just so everyone's aware, on ordinance committee, and anyone who's listening, I received 3 emails today concerning, they did not specify Chapter 30 or Chapter 79, but they clearly concern both of them. So I'll just read them in right now at the beginning so everyone can hear them. The first one was from Isabel Hargrove. And just for the record, Isabel Hargrove, 4 Red Oak Lane, Norwalk. Dear esteemed ordinance committee members, our planning and zoning commissions are essential to properly manage land use, which controls development and zoning and impacts our property taxes, quality of life, and shapes the future growth of our city. Norwalk has gone through explosive growth with unintended consequences on traffic, the environment, our school system, and infrastructure. Now is not the time to merge our 2 commissions, which will reduce the staffing by more than half and create an unreasonable workload on our commissioners. The planning and zoning commissions have very distinctive scopes, which would fall on the same 7 commissioners. We need more focus on planning and zoning, not less. Finally, combining commissions consolidates power on fewer commissioners, which will decrease scrutiny on large developments that are also in need of more, not less. I respectfully encourage the ordinance committee to reject this proposal. So that is the first email. The second one is from Rich Bonifant, and Rich indicated, and I believe most of you received this email. Dear ordinance committee members, I urge the committee to reject the merger of the planning and zoning commissions, primarily because the workload would soon become overwhelming for the fewer commissioners. There would likely not be enough to thoroughly study. There would likely not be enough time to thoroughly study all of the applications or fully examine the required budget requests and decisions. Many people in Norwalk are fed up with rapidly increasing density that has brought us traffic congestion, parking issues, pressures on the school systems, and enterprise zone schemes where the homeowners are paying their own taxes and the developers' obligations too. If this is an attempt to streamline application processes, it will just end up speeding approvals before the public has a chance to understand the ramifications to their neighborhoods. There is no urgent need to combine these commissions, and you should not even consider something of this magnitude while you have little contact with your constituents. During Zoom meetings, you don't even see the public speakers, and we the public have no idea how long the sign-up sheet is, so we get frustrated not knowing when it's our turn. This results in many people simply leaving the meeting. Please don't take advantage of the situation. Show consideration for the opinions of the people that you represent. Thank you, Rich Bonifant. And then finally, Andy Conroy. Greetings, Ms. Chairman and members of the Ordinance Committee. I understand tonight's Ordinance Committee meeting will include a discussion and vote on the proposal to amend Chapter 79 of the Norwalk Ordinances. The intent is to merge/replace the now separate Planning and Zoning Commissions with a combined commission. I've read the proposed language and the current CGS that apply, that's Connecticut General Statutes that apply to these commissions. Having served on the Zoning Commission and liaised with the Planning Commission, capital budget in parentheses, I developed an appreciation of the vast workload of both commissions. It made me wonder why we did not separate the commissions long ago. There were times when the workload was so great that our meetings lasted up until midnight and sometimes beyond, in parentheses. Even the addition of meetings did not fully handle the load. I experienced the Planning Commission dealing with capital budget hearings, in parentheses, and not infrequently rehearings, in parentheses. Much of the hearing requirements are dictated by the CGS, which is the Connecticut General Statutes. Again, a heavy workload for the planning commissioners. Our current 8-member planning commission and 7-member zoning commission at times can barely keep up. As I now understand the combined commission proposal, the combined planning and zoning shall have 7 commission members. That is having the labor available to the commission's work. That is a huge issue, especially with the coming pressure in October resulting from the rewrite of the CGS, Connecticut General Statutes, P&Z, Planning and Zoning Statutes. The minority party representation statute appears to me to limit the majority party to 5 members, not 6, in parentheses, when the commission is 7 or 8 members. Even if the proposed ordinance is amended to increase the commission membership, the upper limit in CGS, Connecticut General Statutes 8-4A, is 10 voting members. That would still be a large reduction in the available labor of the combined commission. Further complicating matters is the apparent legal stricture that requires the combined commission to separate the planning hearings from the zoning hearings. The board must sit as a planning commission when dealing with planning items and separately as a zoning commission when dealing with zoning items. Excuse me. This stricture negates many of the assumed efficiencies of the combination. At minimum, further consideration of the combination should wait until sometime after the October 2021 implementation of the revised CGS, Connecticut General Statutes. The revision is so sweeping that it will take months to fully comply with / absorb the changes. Warm regards, Andy Conroy. And so those are the 3 communications that I received concerning the 2 matters that we're going to be discussing right now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Brian. That's a lot to read. All right, so let's first discuss Chapter 30, Capital Projects Program. And are there any attendees here who want to speak to this matter? If you would like to speak, please raise your hand. I see that Diane Lauricella has raised her hand. We could allow her to speak. That would be great, Anthony.
Granted.
Okay, so Diane, if you would like to speak, please be heard.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Again, for the record, Diane Lauricella. I have, over the years, observed, spoken, and attended numerous planning commission meetings and zoning commission meetings through several mayors, several administrations. So it is with that lens that I looked at this proposal, and I'm one who very much appreciates interesting prospects such as this on paper, also thinking outside the box. But then the reality strikes us, and I feel that I am, as written currently, without additional discussion and a question answer that I will pose in a moment, I think that this particular merger is unwise and premature. I ask that this, in your discussion, that this committee consider postponing making the changes until after the new zoning regs are adopted. And we are undergoing a lengthy process, an important process, and I applaud the administration and the mayor for helping us modernize our zoning regulations. But I think that it's important to finish that process before you even really consider merging 2 commissions. I very much agree with the 3 previous people that Brian read their letters as far as not being in favor of the merger, but for different reasons. I am one that doesn't feel that we have always had too much development, but there has been an uptick in large housing without looking enough at affordability. And that's also a planning construct, not just a zoning application construct. So I asked for both Chapter 30, where you talk about the capital budget. It's a very intense time. I don't even know if I have ever seen anyone from this esteemed committee sitting in and observing the Planning Commission doing their work over several nights for more than a week in trying to help sort out capital budget requests. Number 2, Chapter 79 is where we look at, in Section 3, the composition and appointment of the members. While if there is an unfortunate merger, and I'll explain why I'm saying unfortunate for this particular time in our Norwalk history, I am okay with 9 members, but I am not okay with having no more than 3 per district. I think it should be instead change the wording to say at minimum at least 1 member per 5 voting districts, or no more than 2 members per voting district, because I have seen where some neighborhoods are absolutely not even represented.
Diane,
And
we're
in
coming up on 3 minutes, so if you could make your next points quickly, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
On section 6, I do again think in search committee that you should have some of the citizens, or at least the elected officials from the council, on that search committee, and not just the chairman and vice chair of the new planning and zoning. I think that's a conflict of interest and maybe won't get you the insightful person. But my main issue relates to the following. Right now, the zoning commission, I think, has been given too much responsibility. Many of you may not know this, but they also have the responsibility of zoning enforcement. The Aquifer Agency for the city of Norwalk, which could be placed under a different, either its own or a different entity. And I long ago asked that it be placed under Conservation Commission or the Planning Commission, not zoning. They also have the responsibility for the large and important Coastal Zone Management Act. I think that adding yet another responsibility of a full planning commission is unwise at this time. I feel that—
So Diane, we're kind of catching up on time. So if there's other comments that you'd like to make, please feel free to send Brian an email and we'll make sure that it gets into the record.
Okay, I thank you for your time. I feel this concentrates too much power and workload on one entity. And while I have witnessed in this current administration very good zoning appointments, I also lived through some zoning appointments where we had people that never met a big box they didn't like in the Moshe administration and the Esposito administration. So that's why I think we need to have the checks and balances that lastly, a well-managed planning commission, which has never really optimized its responsibilities. It needs to be managed better. And with Jessica Vonacek being hired, I thought that the issue
All right,
of—
Diane, I really have to be cognizant of other people who'd like to speak in the 3-minute time frame. I'm so sorry. All right.
Lisa, just quickly, George Serenides from Common Council has jumped into the meeting.
Thank you. I was actually going to just note that George has joined us. So thank you very much. If that could be noted in the minutes, I think he joined us at 7:17. So that would be great. Is there anybody else among our attendees who'd like to be heard on Chapter 30 or 79? I really view them as being, those comments may well apply to both. So if you'd like to raise your hand to be heard, please raise it at this time. Okay, well, it appears that no one else would like to be heard on Chapter 30 or Chapter 79, which is Planning and Zoning Commission. So at this time, I will close the public hearing discussion. A public hearing, and open the public hearing discussion thereof. So let's just tick through the different items that we've gone through so far, which is, we'll start with Chapter 37, Article 2, Section 3710. Does any of the committee members want to be heard on this before we bring this to a vote to take it to Common Council? Mr. Livingston.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to agree with Mr. Morichello on this. I think we do need to get out and educate the public a little more, not just on this ordinance, but on the other ordinances we passed, including the straws, stirs, and those particularly, because right now, I mean, I don't want to come down too hard on restaurants in this time period, but I also think that we need to make sure everybody does know about them. So that's really it. I do agree with her about making sure people are aware of this.
I
Is there
shared the
anybody—
screen so that everyone could see what we're with this particular ordinance.
Thanks, Brian. When you do that, I don't see anybody whose hand might be raised. So if another committee member wants to be heard, please feel free to speak up, because I can't call on you because I only see a few of us. David, it looks like you want to speak.
No, I was going to just
you're in
let
my
you know, if you go on your computer, there's a little handle next to the gallery view, and you can slide it over, make the share smaller, and you can see everybody.
Oh, that little thing right there. Oh, that's very clever.
Yeah.
You learn something new every day. Thank you very much. Now I can. All right, now I can see everybody. Is anybody else would like to be heard on the Polystyrene, the styrofoam
Styrofoam.
ordinance? Yep. before
What-
we,
I do have one quick question, and it's about what is the enforcement on this? Is the enforcement up to our police department to go in and police this? Is it the health department? Who actually enforces this?
it tends to fall on Brian Candelo. When we get complaints, we generally tend to call Brian and he then calls the store to let them know that they're not in compliance.
Oh, okay,
So,
thank you.
as it pertains to plastic bags or plastic sturgeon straws or styrofoam, if a member of the public brings it to my attention, then I take a look at what's going on, and then I reach out to the store. And just so the committee members are aware, when plastic bags went into effect, I was rendering legal opinions for these stores because some of them were receiving exceptions, some of them were saying that they'd already purchased plastic bags. So I've kind of been, there are enforcement officials within these ordinances, but at least since they've started, if I've been notified, I reach out to the business and work with them.
Thank you.
So at this time, I'll entertain a motion to vote on taking Chapter 37, Article 2, Section 3710, definition of polystyrene food service product to Common Council. Mr. Livingston, you're making the motion?
Yes, please. I'd like to move that this be moved to the Common Council at its next regularly scheduled meeting.
Okay, and because I now can see all of our committee members, we can vote with a show of hands as to whether or not we would, that we vote in favor of this motion. All right, so that is 6 votes, unanimous, great. So that will be on our Common Council agenda in month of August. The next matter that we'll discuss and vote on is Chapter 38, Article 2, Fireworks and Firecrackers, Section 38.7 through 38.13. You want to share your screen on that too, Brian?
Yes, 1 second.
Everybody can take a quick look at that. This has come before us. This might be the 4th meeting we may well have had on this. And generally speaking, this is giving our fire chief, our fire marshal, the ability to inspect businesses for carrying only legal fireworks, which tend to be the sparklers and fountains, and the other fireworks are illegal in the state of Connecticut in the city of Norwalk. So we've talked about this language several times. Does any committee member want to discuss any terms of this ordinance before we consider it to vote? And Tom, is that your hand up or you just got your thumb by the camera? All right, so appears that no one has wants to raise any. David, Mr.
Yeah,
Hubble?
Lisa, I just wanted to say that, a shout out to Broderick Sawyer and Brian for the work that they did on this. Really, thank you very much. And I think this will help Broderick in his execution of his duties. So I'm happy to see that we've brought it here.
Yeah, I think that everybody's hopeful that this is going to help cut down on the number of illegal fireworks in the city of Norwalk and also make our nights a little bit quieter. So with fingers crossed, we'll have the ability to regulate this a little bit tighter. So this time I will entertain a motion to take this, Mr. Roberts, take this matter to Common Council. So Mr. Roberts made the motion. All in favor? That's 6 votes for that. And that's unanimous. So that means that we will also be taking the fireworks ordinance to Common Council at our next meeting. As we said before, we are not going to be voting on Chapter 30 and Chapter 79. The idea really was so that we wanted to give the public a chance to take a look at this. And the thought is that, the month of August is pretty quiet, but I think that Mr. Livingston had a couple of things that he wanted to bring our attention to. And perhaps Mr. Kleppen can help us respond to some of the public comments that we heard, or at least give us some color to what we might have heard and correct any misunderstandings that there might be. You want to start, Mr. Livingston, with your thoughts that you wanted to share?
Sure. Glad to. Thank you. I wanted to go over some of the changes from the last meeting. They were sent, Brian, am I correct? These were sent along separately, sort of I call them discussion comments, if you will. And
Yes.
these are the result of comments from Mr. Schulman, Mr. DiMaglio, sorry, and Matt Sapienza of the Law Department, as well as some other comments. And I just wanted to highlight them so everybody sees what they were. A lot of them are just tightening up the language a bit. So I'll just run through them and stop me if you have any specific questions. I'm going to start with chapter 30. And this is in 30-5. I changed the word projects to budget items because that's what's defined. Let's just tighten it
Hold
up.
on one second, Tom. Where is that?
That's in 30-5. So yeah, is that the discussion one, Brian? I think that's the what you're showing is the.
I think this is actually the legal notice. Hold on. I
Yeah.
gotta find the other one. This way I can show everybody those changes. Bear with me.
Well, while he's doing that, just to
Yeah.
put this chapter 30 in context. We've heard a lot about the workload of the proposed combined commission. And as we've discussed in the past, one of the big items that the Planning Commission deals with every year is the capital budget review process. And so the point of these changes is to help streamline that process a little bit. And as I said, I've gone over this with Fran and Lou and Steve and others to see what works to make this process a little more manageable, to make it something that won't be so time consuming and sort of better frame the discussion. So is that up now? Okay, so let me move on to 30-7. And this is there's two changes here. One is just, again, capital budget item, just clarifying that in that language. But the larger change here is one that Fran suggested, is to, I mean, we're not trying, well, let me back up. So the role of the Planning Commission, planning in the new combined Planning and Zoning Commission, is to look at each budget item in the context of the POCD. And so what this is, this new language is that they will, at the end of that, they will prepare a report saying whether each capital budget item is or is not consistent with the master plan. And the report will also contain any recommendations of the Planning and Zoning with respect to the program as a whole. So the Planning and Zoning Commission can still do that, and they're going to deliver that report to the mayor as already provided, as well as to the Common Council, Board of Estimate and Taxation, and Controller. So that's just sort of codifying, if you will, what that report contains and where it will go. Fran was concerned that we want to make sure there was some teeth in this, so that's what that does. 30-8 just clarifies what report we're talking about. And these are just clarification language. I can stop if you want me to, but there's nothing significant there. The next one that is a change, a more significant change, is 30-10, and it's not the whole section. It's the last sentence, and we've added the language, notwithstanding anything to the contrary in this chapter, if any proposed capital project item has been determined by the Planning and Zoning Commission to not be consistent with the city's master plan for the fiscal development of the city, POCD, such items shall not be included in the capital budget or otherwise funded unless it has been approved by a 2/3 vote of the entire Common Council. So that's basically saying that everything in the budget has to be specifically called out if it's not consistent with the POCD, and if it's not consistent, then the council has to approve it by 2/3 vote. All right, and I think that may be it of the changes on subsequent to the last meeting on these sections.
And then Tom, do you want to just roll into 79 and then we'll get to
Yeah, okay, sure.
thoughts about the comments in general, because they really 30 and 79 work together.
Right. Okay. So let's go 79. And these comments again are Fran and Lou and Matt, and a lot of it just is taking away brackets from last time. There's one change that's not in here that I've just gotten from Matt, and it's in section 79, subpart 2. It's the last clause where it says, to the extent that such powers and duties are not inconsistent with the powers and duties provided under the Connecticut General Statutes. We're taking that language out at Matt's suggestion, as it could be possibly confusing. So that's being taken out. In 3, I've taken out the brackets around 9 and 6.
Tom, is that, it ends with City of Norwalk, Charter of the City of Norwalk, period?
Yes.
Right, and then you said, and which is the next one?
Well, the next ones have just taken out brackets.
Oh, I see, yeah, okay.
And go, actually, that's, I think, maybe the rest of the section. Oh, till in sections 2 and, well, I'm sorry, 3, both paragraphs taking out brackets, and section 4 taking out brackets. This is what we talked about last time. 9 regular members, 3 alternates. Getting down to 5, the terms of office. And I want to jump ahead to the effective date. We had talked about having this effective January 1, 2022, but Brian rightfully suggested that we don't have a council meeting until the 11th. So we want to make sure that we don't have a sort of a hole in there. So we're making this effective January 11th, but that means the terms, they could go from January 11th to January 11th of the following year, one of the next 3 years. But I just made it January 1st, but that can be changed. I just like to have it an even year going forward. And that is in section 5A, which is the staggered terms. So while the statute, the ordinance is effective on January 11th, the terms are going to run to January 1st. It's just cutting 10 days out, but it's just for to make it easier to follow. So what it is for the regular members, there are 3 staggered terms. One is for 1 year, one is for 2 years, and one is for 3 years, and the same for the alternates. And I think that's really it for the changes, the subsequent changes. But I can take any questions on any other language that was included in the materials.
Before we ask Steve about some general policy decisions, is there any other changes that people might have for the language that is before us at this time? All right, seeing no hands raised, let's turn to Steve. And Steve, you heard the 4 comments that were made over the course of the public hearing. Can you give us a sense of your reaction to some of those thoughts and some of those concerns? And if there's some misunderstandings, can you help allay those?
Yeah,
Sure,
and
I'll do my best.
Thank you.
And I wrote some notes down, but I'm sure I don't have all the points raised. So if there are specific items that you'd like me to address that I missed, please bring that to my attention. A couple things that were raised, and this, I caught this from Ms. Loricella, was one, and this is going to completely go in random order at this point, but so we are in the process of updating the zoning regulations. We have a consultant on board. Actually, next Thursday night is the kind of kickoff meeting for that. So that process is probably about a 12 to 14 months from now to adoption of the new regulations. If anybody's ever spent any time with the current regulations, they'll know they're really rough. They're not easy to work with. They're the antithesis of user-friendly. So I think the final document will ultimately benefit whether it's separate zoning commission or the combined commission, which I hope is the direction that it goes. So that will make the commission's lives easier, less work, less time trying to understand things, less time for staff interpreting things, and makes it, just a smoother workflow. Ms. Loricella also discussed the role of the zoning commission also functions as the aquifer protection agency. I've been here almost 5 years. I think they've met as the aquifer protection agency twice a year and they meet for about 10 to 15 minutes when they do meet. So it's a very small role. If the city decided that they wanted to push that function onto the Conservation Commission, I don't think the Zoning Commission would object, and I don't think that really has any bearing on the workload whatsoever. A lot has been raised. I think the big workload function that the Planning Commission has, and Mr. Livingston touched on this, was the role of the Planning Commission in the capital budget process. One of the things that that was one of the reasons to go forward with this is that the Planning Commission's function in the capital budget process is not, it's not always adhered to. So it's, there's a lot of work that goes into it. They interview all the various departments and individuals who have capital requests, and then they put a separate capital budget together, which at the end really doesn't have a lot of teeth to it. It's just the way that the system is set up. What we tried to do was actually give it a little more teeth, but then take a little bit of the work away. So I think the kind of recommendation is that they'll look at each item that comes in, and similar to what they do with an 824 referral, is make a determination of whether the specific capital project is consistent with the citywide plan. And I really think that's kind of an important task that has to happen. Second, what they'll do is provide some kind of memorandum or something to the mayor indicating that here's the items that we looked at, here's our findings. And then also they have the ability to say, we'd like you to place a specific emphasis on these type of items. Maybe they're really keen on sidewalks or specific infrastructure projects they feel line up with the citywide plan, and they'll try to put some emphasis on that. The other language that was added was, and Tom, please correct me if I'm wrong, something to the effect that if there's an item that the commission indicates is not consistent with the citywide plan, and then ultimately it wants to, that item looks to get funded, that it would take a 2/3 vote for that item to get funded. So I think that gives the planning commission's decision a little more weight, and that's consistent with how the 824 referral process functions now. And I think Tom also indicated that the majority of the workload, a big chunk of it right now, comes from the zoning commission itself. So since we have split commissions, anytime there is an amendment to the zoning regulations or an amendment to the zoning map, those have to get referred to the planning commission, who really is looking at things from the lens of, is this text amendment or is this map amendment consistent with the citywide plan? And it would be a lot more seamless if the combined commission was looking at that as one body. I think that they're more than capable of doing that. They kind of do that function right now. And I think there's a tension that arises in the planning commission because the planning commission likes to look at the other items that are more site plan specific or application specific that aren't really under their purview. So that it tends to add to the planning commission's workload, which is really at the end of the day, unnecessary work. So I think a side effect of that is that an applicant has to go to 2 separate bodies to get approval for the same project. And that adds time, cost, and just extra work on the city side as well, because we have to hire minute takers for those meetings. We have to notice the meetings. It's just additional staff time. We're paying overtime for people to attend multiple meetings, which is a little bit duplicative. So I think those are savings there. The planning commission, one of their other main functions was, looking at subdivision applications. That, Norwalk is a really built community. So there is, maybe 4 to 5 subdivision applications a year. That's not a lot. Subdivision applications are really a straightforward process in that if the applicant meets the standards as outlined in the subdivision regulations, the planning commission doesn't have the ability to say no. You can't say, no, I don't like the project. That's not an option in a subdivision application. So that's a pretty straightforward process. And so is the other one that they do a lot of is an 824 referral. It's pretty simple. If somebody comes in, say the city wants to abandon a street and there's an abutting property owner who wants to buy the property, the planning commission is making a determination of, okay, this is consistent with the citywide plan. It's a pretty straightforward process. It's not an involved special permit application with a lot of different moving parts. Lastly, and then I'll be quiet and respond to any questions you have, is I think the staff makeup, not makeup's probably the wrong one, the staff kind of direction over the last few years has changed to a planning first mentality. And I'll say we had a lot of planning catching up to do. As you know, we did the citywide plan, we did the East Norwalk plan. We're getting to the end stages of the industrial zone study. So we've done a lot of the legwork. And what those plans allow us to do is set the stage for how we want to see things develop. And I understand that not everybody likes the outcome of the plans or likes some of the things that may be the byproducts of those plans. But we go through a public process when we do those. We indicate here's what we're recommending and why. And then ultimately we write regulations that are consistent with those plans. And that's the process we've been following for the last several years. And I think it's a solid one. And like I said, not everybody is thrilled with the outcomes, but We think that the change that's coming from those plans is appropriate and consistent with the citywide plan that was approved in 2019.
So Steve, there are a couple other questions there, if I could. One of them was that one of the comments said that this would reduce staffing, and is that correct? I didn't see how that.
I heard that and I wasn't sure what that was referring to. I think maybe staffing of the commissions, but not staffing of city staff department side.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay, the other comment, and it was Mr. Conroy's, I mean, was about some revisions to the Connecticut general statutes. Do you know what he's referring to?
I was listening to that, and the only ones that I'm aware of that I think is what he's referencing. I didn't speak with Mr. Conroy about that, but there were some recent legislation passed regarding the overall 8-2, and that's the kind of enabling legislation. But that had to do with accessory dwelling units. There were some issues in terms of, parking reductions. And so we're aware of those. I don't think those have any significant impact on city workload or city function.
And you don't think that maybe somebody can check that before the next meeting, whether there's anything there that would affect us?
Yeah, and I'm happy to reach out to him and ask him what specifically he was referring to. I'm happy to do that. Yeah,
the other thing he mentioned was that the committee would have to meet separately as a planning committee and as a zoning committee. That wasn't my understanding. Is that yours for certain matters?
No, they do. Obviously, they wear two different hats, and one in there in a legislative capacity, and one there in, and I'm forgetting the term, but they have two different functions. Sometimes they're looking at things through the planning lens, and sometimes they're looking at things through the zoning lens. And the lines blur quite a bit, but I don't think it alters the workload or alters the mindset at all.
And it doesn't alter the way they act, then, right? They act.
No, they'll have to make findings based on the application. One thing we talked about the other night after the planning commission meeting was the staff level. We talked about, and one of the commissioners reached out to me after and talked about, sometimes they get a little worried that there's not enough training that's given to them. We have done that in the past, but I think one thing we'll do going forward, whether it's the zoning commission or planning commission, is clearly show them the enabling legislation and be more articulate about the specific zoning regulation or subdivision regulation that they're actually acting on during that application. We point them out and we state them, but we're actually going to go so far as to copy and paste the text in, so that way they know here's what my job is and my function is on this specific application.
Right. Thank you.
Do any other committee members have questions of Mr. Kleppen? Dominique Johnson?
Thank you, Chair. I guess my question, just to bounce off of Councilmember Livingston's, going back into the feedback we got from residents, Mr. Kleppen, to the idea that merging these two commissions would leave out a check and balance, especially for communities who are not seeing development in their neighborhoods aligned with what they would like to see. For example, like very large apartment buildings where they would rather have smaller condo communities. Is there some truth to that issue being raised you could see here?
No, simply because the planning commission does not see, unless it's a text amendment or a map amendment, the planning commission doesn't have a voice on those applications specifically. Like if there's a new, down in South Norwalk, unless there's a specific amendment, they don't see those applications. And even if they do get the text amendment or the map amendment referral from the zoning commission, they don't hold public hearings on those. So the public's not engaged in that process anyway. The planning commission has a very narrow role in that. They're saying, okay, this amendment is consistent with the citywide plan. And, staff tries to bring most of the amendments that come to the zoning commission. Staff has hopefully vetted those and gotten those to a point where they're supportive of that particular amendment, and we'll make it known if we're not. So we're hoping we're teeing it up for the commission to be something that they can act upon that is consistent with the long range vision for the community.
Okay, thank you. To follow up, so would it be zoning that then would be as it exists now, like a neighborhood community group could come if they were concerned to zoning at the public hearing? Is that how that works currently? And then if so, then would that be changed through this merger?
Correct. So it would be the zoning commission. If it is a public hearing item too, not everything is a public hearing. Some things, not to get too into the deep in the weeds on the process, but there's 3 types of permits that we deal with. One is just a zoning permit, or some people refer to it as an over-the-counter permit, which means what I'm proposing is as of right, like you're putting in a pool in your backyard, or I'm putting a new business in, and it meets all the standards that are in the regulations. So that's something that can get approved quickly. A site plan approval, it's kind of similar in one sense to a subdivision application, which I mentioned earlier. If the applicant checks all the boxes, so the building's not too tall, it meets all the parking requirements, the use is approved, it meets the setbacks, the zoning commission has to approve that application. We do look at things like traffic, et cetera. So assuming it doesn't provoke, is it going to pose a traffic risk? That's something that the zoning commission is bound to approve. You can't, there's no discretion built into there to say, I don't like this, or I don't like the color of the building. That's not built into the process. The special permit automatically triggers a public hearing. There's neighbor notification when they submit their application, as well as when they submit for public hearing. So they have to get notified twice. Right now, the process is that, and this is the way the code is written, that only the abutters are notified. Other communities do have a larger radius around the application. So that's something that we can look at as part of the zoning rewrite, but that's where the public process would take place.
Thank you for that information. Appreciate it.
And just to be clear, none of that changes under this merger. All of those rules stay exactly the same. So
Yeah.
we're set. Mr. Keegan, it appears you have a question. Oh, I think you're muted. You are muted.
What
There we
else
go.
is new? Madam Chair, I'm sorry, but I have to leave our meeting to go to another commitment.
Great. Please rejoin if you get a chance, but otherwise, good luck.
Okay, thank you.
Great,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Let the minutes reflect the fact that it's 7:49 and Mr. Keegan had to leave us. Does anybody else have questions for Mr. Kleppen? Mr. Hovelman?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The question I have is are we missing something here? What is it 118-1400 zoning commission? Don't we need to change the name of that as well? It's section 118, what is it, Article 140 or Article 40, I think. Maybe Brian, you can help me out.
I'll see if I can pull it up right now, David.
Yeah, if you pull it up, it's section 118-1400 zoning commission. And it outlines duties of the zoning commission, and then 118-1410 outlines the Board of Appeals.
Board of Appeals wouldn't be subject to
No,
this.
but I'm saying, but 118-1400 would be, it's the title zoning commission. So I'm wondering if that needs to be folded into this discussion also, because it's got a very specific list of duties that was put together in 75 and then amended in 2000.
It may just be a matter of changing the name, but let's take a look.
It may just be a name change, but if you take a look at it. And it also outlines, additional list of duties that the zoning commission is responsible for, which adds to the question of workload, whether this is folded into what's already there, or these are other duties that the zoning commission is also responsible for.
Well, the amendment, just to go back to we're not eliminating any duties of the zoning commission. we're just combining the commissions. So, I mean, the fact that these are here doesn't change anything. We're not eliminating these.
Right.
So are we just changing the name? Would it just be 118, 1400 Planning and Zoning Commission? Is that? Should we take that under advisement?
Yeah, we'll
Or,
take a look.
yeah, let's make with that one of the things that we discuss when we bring it back to committee in August. How about that? Thank you for bringing that to our attention, David. That's great.
Yeah, it was while noodling around, I found it and was like, that might be of
Yeah,
pertinent.
maybe you
value.
need to have a name change on that. Anything else on comments for this? And then we'll close this discussion, and then we'll open it up for any public comment that might be pending in the attendees list, and then we'll move on to the acceptance of the minutes. Thank you, Steve, for a really clear conversation, and thank you for taking notes during all of the various comments so that those could be addressed and put into the record. We really appreciate it. We might have you take a look at the minutes and make sure that the minutes reflect the comments so that there is a good dialogue between the comments that were made and your responses, if you wouldn't mind. That'd be
Yep.
great.
No problem.
Great. All right, well, let's close our public hearing discussion, and why don't we invite any of the attendees who may want a public comment to the other pending new business to raise their hand at this time on any of those matters. Is there anybody who would like to be heard during the public comment section of the meeting? Please signal by raising your hand. Seeing none, we'll move on to acceptance of the minutes. Some of you may remember that the May 18th meeting had quite an extensive conversation actually about chapters 30 and 79. We thought it was a little hard to follow in the minutes as they were. So we gave everybody a chance to take a second look at the minutes. Does anybody, well, I'd like to see if somebody would make a motion to accept the minutes and then any discussion about that. So Mr. Hooverman, are you asking that we accept the minutes for May 18th?
Yes, I'm moving to accept the minutes of May 18th.
Great. Is there any discussion, comment, or amendments? Mr. Livingston?
Yeah, thank you. So I have some comments. So start page 4, third paragraph, second line. Well, I'll read the sentence. Mr. Livingston gave a historical overview of the Planning and Zoning Commissions. Planning and Zoning were one commission. Insert the words from 1971 to 1988. The next paragraph, the last word stature, it should be statute. In the last paragraph of this page, it says, second line, Mr. Livingston said that when he looked for information in the hour, it changed the word was not, it did not appear to be a legal issue. On page 5.
1 second. The first comment you had on page 4, I got the second too. Where was it again? The first comment you made?
It was on the third paragraph, second line, after the word commission.
Yep.
No, back, yeah. Back before the comma.
Yep.
Add the words from 1971 to 1988. Okay.
5.
Then top of the next page, Ms. D'Ameglio said she supports merging, not separating. They're already separated.
Yep.
And it's zoning commissions, plural at the end. The next paragraph, Mr. D'Ameglio said this is a positive thing and should be looked at
Thank
as a
you. I
whole.
had that one.
Yeah. And I think that's all I have on this page. Yeah.
Are there any other amendments from other committee members? Go ahead, Dominique. Oh,
Thank you. I think, yes, create is listed twice. Tom, did you catch that? No.
Is that-
I'm just looking up on the screen, the red line. So it says the first paragraph on this page from the entire city to create a balanced membership. I assume one of those creates is, and yeah, there it goes.
I missed it. Thanks.
thank you, Dominique. That's great. So we have a
Sure.
motion on the table to accept the minutes as amended. All in favor? Great. The minutes are accepted. So the second set of minutes that we have for this month are the June 15th minutes. Can I have a motion to accept those minutes? Mr. Roberts, can we have a discussion on that? Is there anybody who would like to make any amendments or changes? Mr. Livingston?
Thank you. Page 5, It's the first line. It says, Mr. Livingston reviewed the duties and powers from the Connecticut General Statute. It should be statutes,
Hold on
plural.
1 second, Tom. I got stuck on,
Yes, sir.
Connecticut General Statutes.
Plural. And then the second to last paragraph on that page, Mr. Livingston said one of the concerns that has been expressed is the workload. He says that, well, he said, delete, this deals with the capital budget and, so he said he wants to see a way to streamline the capital budget process to reduce the workload. So he said he wants to see a way to streamline the capital budget process to reduce the workload.
Any other changes from any other committee member? Okay, so we have a motion on the table to accept the minutes as amended by Mr. Livingston and the manner was just described. All in favor? Great, so that's also unanimous. Terrific. All right. so
That's
the
for both
minutes
of them,
now-
Lisa?
I'm sorry?
That's for both of them?
Yes, they were both accepted as amended. All right, now it is time to move to old business, of which we have none, and new business. So Jess is here, and Jess, why don't we let you give us a little bit of an overview about outdoor dining, if you could start that conversation. There she is.
Yep, absolutely. I also have a little PowerPoint just to get us on the same page with outdoor dining. Do you mind if I share my screen?
That'd be great. I don't know if Brian can help you or whether Anthony can empower you.
Let's see.
You can.
Thank you, Anthony.
Let me see here. Can you see it?
We can.
Great. So just wanted to talk a little bit about outdoor dining and thinking about next steps and thinking about parklets, which is something we've been talking about internally with different departments, but we're still exploring the idea. So I wanted to take an opportunity just to get us on the same page tonight because it will impact and will have impacts to the outdoor dining ordinance. And I think we've talked previously in the past about the existing outdoor dining ordinance and, much like the zoning regulations, the outdoor dining ordinance was done a number of years ago. It needs to be updated anyway. So we are thinking about not only the update of that ordinance, but also next steps. And I think that this conversation is relevant to be able to think about what that ordinance looks like moving forward. So, I just want to talk a little bit about parklets tonight and just introduce the concept so we're all on the same page. Parklets are ways in which cities can basically increase vitality and increase pedestrian use of the streets. And, it's a way to enhance public gathering spaces. Cities across the country and across the world are really doing it. And here's just a snapshot of some of the cities that are doing that. But it really is it's really a partnership. And so the way in which it works is that the city establishes a program, guidelines, standards, and that the businesses come to the table and they support the design and they sponsor and actually pay for the use of the parklet. So for example, and every city does it completely differently. So for example, in some cities, the restaurateurs pay a portion of the parking space fee for the season. And they would also pay to build out the modular platform as well as the structure that is the railing structure to go around the outside. And generally it's modular. So at the end of the season, they would actually pull the parklet in, they would store the parklet themselves. And then the next season they would apply for a permit again, and they would use the same parklet that they had built the previous year. So it really is a great example of a public-private partnership. And, when we think about parklets, they can be anywhere from a couple of $1,000s to $30,000. So depending on the lift of the parklet, and I'm sure we've all seen sort of more of the basic parklets, but then we've also seen more of the fancier parklets that have lights and have plants. And if anyone's had the chance to go to New York in the summer or Montreal in the summer, Chicago, you can see them really in every urban area. So this is just one example of a custom wood build out. This one is alternative railing with planters. It really starts to get interesting when you start to see parklets coming out. This one's in London, but with different plantings that are native plantings, starts to bring some greenery. This one's actually an example of the city and the council supporting this. So it's not used by a restaurant and it's not used by any one particular business. It's actually just an enhancement of a public area where people can go and sit in that public area. And then there's basic ones that include installation of plywood. And the one on the left is obviously painted plywood with planters on the top. Looks like herbs that they've planted. And then the one on the right is just a basic painted plywood. So it just, these are just examples of how different cities are viewing parklets. If you look at the picture on the left, it actually, you can see it in this one a little bit better, but parklets meet ADA compliance because the idea is that you build a platform that's as high as the curb. So you would walk directly from the sidewalk onto the parklet itself, which means that we don't need to do any ramps. The other piece that, we've talked about is, well, the outdoor dining barriers that were out this year and last year, they created a pedestrian walking area where DPW installed ramps to be able to get down to that pedestrian walking area. Parklets work a little bit different. The way that parklets work is that you would have dining adjacent to the building storefront or restaurant front, and then you would have a 5-foot pedestrian pathway for ADA access, and then you would have dining or seating on the actual parklet itself. So the people would be sitting where the parking space is, but they would be sitting on top of this platform that's protected. So, just super quick, but I just really wanted to say that, that we're working with, and we need to work with DPW and the police department, the health department, and the Norwalk Parking Authority to further explore a program. But the reason I mention it is because regardless of if we decide to advance a parklet program or not, we really need to think about the outdoor dining ordinance and the legislation that is put in place currently is good till March 2022. So we know that we have a lot of work to do here at the city before March of 2022 to be able to update that ordinance, again, regardless of the parklet program or not.
I'm sorry, Jessica, it's George. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just looking at those pictures and I read your comments in the hour about everybody congregating on the barriers. And the pictures you just showed, kind of, that picture in particular, I feel kind of invites people to congregate more than the barriers. So how's that going to solve that problem? Only because I just read that article in the paper.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think what you were seeing with the barriers on Washington is that it was one long stretch. It was basically, 50 feet of one long barrier. Whereas this is not, parklets are really not built in one long stretch. This is probably 2 parking spaces. Some of them are built on 1 parking space, but here in Norwalk, we would be able to say that your parklet can be 1 parking space or your parklet can be 2 parking spaces, but it wouldn't necessarily create a barrier between the roadway and the sidewalk for that long of a stretch.
And then would the restaurant be in charge of managing how that is managed? I mean, they would be in charge of who's congregating.
That's right. And that's right. And it would also be by permit. So, I think that we've learned a lot about outdoor dining over the last season and last year as well. And I think that we learned that, folks didn't use outdoor dining during the winter. So we don't want to use parking spaces during the winter, take those parking.
I'm sorry, George. Just to go back to the Lisa's comment. Again, referring back to the newspaper article, in there it said that it started in one area and people were just moving up and down the street. So how's that going to prevent it, especially at 2 in the morning when some of those restaurants are closed? How's that going to prevent people from walking up and down the street? I mean, are we asking the restaurant owners down there to pull the parklet in at night, or say they're not there? I'm curious. As everybody knows, I have a restaurant down there. And
sure. So I think that we know,
because of the problem of a certain few. So now Yeah, I don't, personally, I don't see this as a solution. So I'm just kind of curious to see how it's going to work going forward. I think it's going to be more inviting, personally.
But we certainly have to put together an ordinance to, address that. Those are important issues about enforcement and who's responsible for the policing of the parklet, whether it's a barrier or a parklet, right? So that seems
Yeah.
like a good thing for all of us to address in the ordinance, George. I'd love to hear your thoughts when we have a first draft of, how that responsibility should be shared between the restaurants and the police department or other
Yeah,
enforcement
I
agencies.
also, oh, sorry, Lisa. I also feel like, I was just saying that I think we learned a lot this year and I think we learned a lot last year, right? And I think that, we learned who is able to potentially manage a parklet and who is not able to probably manage a parklet, right? And would be a permitted exercise. It could be launched as a pilot. It could be launched as a pilot where we allow 5 parklets or even 10 parklets as a start. It doesn't need to be that we launch the program citywide for everybody who applies. It can literally be a couple of people, it could be a couple of businesses that we know have done their part with outdoor dining in previous months, and they're the ones who are eligible for the first 5 parklets. So I think, we can launch it as a pilot program. I don't think it needs to be that the whole entire street needs a parklet. And I also think that part of the guidelines and standards means that we definitely don't do what we did with the outdoor dining barriers, which is block, 100 feet at a time where the police can't get in or the public can't get out. So I think we need to think a lot about that. But again, regardless if we advance a parklet program or not, or a pilot program or not, the outdoor dining ordinance does need to be updated, and we do need to update that language. And I think, again, we've learned a lot over the last year, and we learned a lot last summer as well with outdoor dining and frankly, the outdoor dining ordinance we currently have is antiquated. So, it's only allowing tables up against the restaurant facade. It doesn't allow them anywhere else on the sidewalk. It's not like you can have a table against your restaurant and have a 5-foot space and a table on your curb. That's all the existing city ordinance as it stands now. So it really needs to be updated.
So it sounds like we need to update it. And just before I take comments from my other committee members, it sounds as though, at least the way I imagine drafting this would be, it's not one size fits all, perhaps. And it is a permitted process. Mr. Huberman, I think you had your hand up first, and then Mr. Roberts.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, it is. This is the whole point of, I think, what we're working on right now is to create an ordinance that encompasses these things. And if this is a permitted situation, then an issue that would come up where there were violations, the permit would be revoked, the parklet would be taken down. I think there are a lot of different ways to solve this, and I think that as Jess has brought up, we're looking at an antiquated ordinance and trying to find out what can we do moving forward, which can potentially give exposure and tourism and all of the things that we would like to have it happen. But that's what we're involved in right now. Correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Chair, but I thought.
No, I think that's right. I think that we're looking for ways to support our dining establishments, because I think we learned in COVID that there is a vast interest in having outdoor dining opportunities.
We had a very immediate need in COVID to get a situation for restaurant owners to be able to have patronage because of the rules that were there. And now by that happening, I think that we're seeing that there's a possibility that we can expand it into something, but that we have to have ordinances in place and rules in place so that that those things are followed, and that we don't have situations that occurred down there in the early part of the summer. So
exactly right. And also, I think that the amount of dining that's now permitted pursuant to our old statute is pretty limited. So I think that it would help the establishments to expand that dining if we can find ways to do it. Mr. Roberts, I'm speaking during your time. I promised you next.
No, it's fine. Do your thing, Madam Chair. Jessica, I just got like a few quick questions, but it's all intertwined. So are we these parklets cutting off the sidewalk, or are they cutting off the same exact thing as where the barriers were, which is parking as well? And at the same sense, are these parklets going to be to the concept of having holes in them so that the police can, or just law enforcement or anybody in general can get inside of them, intertwine in them, or, you know, because I see that the police still can get around the barrier. So I'm just trying to find out, you know, what the parklets are meant for.
Yep. So I think the the intention of the parklets are to provide the restaurants and the small businesses an opportunity for their patrons to be able to sit outside. And in addition to that, the intent of the parklet is to help promote the goals and objectives of the POCD, which speak to streetscape enhancement, speak to vitality, speak to economic development, and speak to being able to do placemaking and be able to really enhance the street presence. The challenge with the barriers that we had that were put out is that the barriers were put out, again, to be able to be responsive to COVID and responsive to the fact that the restaurants had a lower capacity, and we were trying to support the restaurants in being able to do that. The way in which these parklets would work, I think, is that we don't need to have them back to back to back to back, right? And I think that that's part of the guidelines and the standards, is that we would need to be able to, and it's not guidelines and standards as far as how many are there and where are they on the street. It's also guidelines and standards as far as what does the fencing look like? Does there need to be openings in that fencing? And if we go back to some of these, I mean, these areas could be open so that we could be able to have more access to that particular area. So I think the guidelines and standards are ones that need to be built with DPW and the police department to be able to ensure that everyone is comfortable with the way in which they're being put together.
And I just want to say that we don't want to get too deep into the weeds tonight on this. This is just the introduction of the ideas. We've got 2 other agenda items. We've got people who've been waiting for an hour and 15 minutes to speak about trees. So let's take one more comment and then we'll move on to the other item that Jess is covering tonight. So Mr. Huberman, you have your hand up, and then Mr. Sirenides, and we'll wrap up the discussion if we could. You are muted, I think, David.
I am indeed. Sorry about that. No, I just wanted to quickly say that I like the exploration of this because it also keeps the pedestrian traffic in front of the shop owners that are down in any of these commercial areas as well. Not just the restaurants, but there are shop owners that would like that pedestrian traffic, you know, back on the sidewalk, which I think is important. So
Be also important. Mr. Sirenides, you've got a comment, and then Dominique, and then let's kind of wrap it up so we can get on, because we're really only talking about this at a high level. We're not writing the ordinance at this time.
I just wanted to agree with you that, yes, there does need to be some change to the ordinance. It's outdated. The barriers were there for a good purpose, and they served that purpose. But now we got to look into it going forward with the right idea, and not something that's going to be thrown out there and then changed and changed and changed again, especially to the expense of the restaurant owners or to the expense of the city, taking spaces, giving spaces, or changing the layout of the parking spaces.
That's an excellent point.
Right now, to plan something that's going to last for a long time, and it can't be on a pick or choose, because we're not talking about blocks. You can't just pick them up, put them away, or punish somebody and take it away. If we know if there's a problem and we know where the problem is, we got to deal with it accordingly. But with this current layout, and again, we got to watch where we go with all these restrictions, knowing firsthand what that looks like. I think we have to come up with a good, solid idea that works across the board. And we definitely have to take the police department and the emergency services into consideration to make sure that's something that's going to last for a while. Because nobody, including the people that come down to Sono, like to see constant change when they're familiar with something they're happy with.
Absolutely. I think the consistency of having an ordinance in place that is something people can rely on is a great idea. Dominique, one comment, and then let's move on to the city seal for Jess.
Thank you, Chair. I will be brief because I know we're big picture now. So I just wanted to say that it sounds like we're going to have really good conversations about this moving forward that will involve lots of community and with city partners, but I'm also just hoping we also involve community partners from particularly South Norwalk District B, because I don't think it sounds like yet we've chosen where exactly the parklets will be, is my impression. And so that would be just however, like us in the council, and then connected with community leaders to make sure that this is part of a bigger conversation about walkability, and to your point, Ms. Vanashuk, about quality of life and having places to recreate, you know, or just spaces to be outside is really, like, for me, what's real central about it. So thank you. Thank you,
Those are
Chair.
really important comments. So thank you. So I think
Lisa,
that.
just real quick, I think we should reach out to Brian Griffin from Chamber of Commerce.
Yes,
I
I think that Jess has been in touch with.
Okay.
With that. But I agree with all of that. And I think that in our August meeting, with any luck, we might have language to look at, or at least some outlines of ideas. But really, we're at 30,000 feet and we're really not at a place where we're commenting on particular ideas quite yet. So Jess, let's talk about the seal really quickly, and then we're going to move on to trees, because we have some people we're really excited to hear from on the tree ordinance.
Great, let's do that. So let me just, so I can give you some background. Share this. Okay, can you see this?
Yes.
All right, so for background, we, as part of the POCD and looking at economic community development, we wanted to be able to replace the gateway signs that are the signs that sit at the exits of the highways, to be able to point people in the direction of current amenities and current establishments. And we were noticing that the gateway signs in some cases actually had business names on them that were out of date, or different landmarks that weren't really that had moved, or so on and so forth. And through the exercise of trying to update the gateway sign at exit 16, we realized that we had the traditional seal of Norwalk, and we did not necessarily have updated graphics that transferred well onto wood, or could be used well to etch the wood. So went through an exercise where we asked a graphic designer that we are working with, DKA, for the marketing and promotional campaign for the city, both economic development and tourism. We asked them to work on the traditional seal to be able to clean it up and actually create graphics for us that could be used on infrastructure and could be used for different folks to be able to put the seal on. At the same time, we realized that the traditional seal didn't necessarily marry well or fit well with the Visit Norwalk brand, which was publicly voted on for the city to adopt. And as a result of that, we said to DKA, can you please work on the city seal and come up with something that's a little bit more clean and a little bit more crisp, that actually marries well with the Visit Norwalk. And this will be for marketing and promotional reasons. And, the Visit Norwalk can go with the seal that is a little bit cleaner and a little bit crisper, that sort of fits the feel of the Visit Norwalk brand a little bit more. So the brand in which they came up with, or the seal design which they came up with, is the one on the right-hand side. So originally when we brought it to you, Tom had pointed out, which was great, that we had 2 of the images on and not 3. We were missing the well. So DKA went back, and we worked with DKA to put the well back on. But I've been working with Brian Candela on this, because one of the things that we've noted is that the city does have the right to be able to change the seal, both the language and the design. But one of the statutes in the actual ordinance speaks to any changes in design or inscription upon the seal. And that's the case where we would need to go to town clerk, and we would need to go to Secretary of State. So, I think more than anything, it's just open for discussion. But as you can see, the language on the seal and the content on the seal to the right is the same as the one on the left. So I think we just need to determine, if we go through the process of the town clerk and the Secretary of State, or if we feel as though it's not really a design change because it's the same content, and it's definitely not the language is the same. So just in here.
So I'm opening it up to discussion. I'm not, I don't know that I have a firm view of this. It appears to be pretty similar. Your view is just to use it for marketing purposes, right? Mr. Livingston, we'll hear from you.
No, I'm all in favor of this. I just, I have to defer to Brian as to, yes, we have the same elements, but the design is different. I'm not saying it's material different. I don't know.
It's just a yes or no, Brian. We can go through the process or not.
I'm fine with, going through the process is fine, whatever you want to do. I just think that maybe it's safer just to do it.
I did talk to, I did want to say that I did talk to David Westmoreland, and he did comment that he loves that the seal on the right is clean and crisp and that you can see the images, that the one on the left can be a little convoluted, especially if you're driving by in a car. You can't necessarily tell what the images are because of the way in which it's been, the graphics have been put together. So, but he did feel as though the seal on the right was a good choice, especially with the marketing and promotional side.
Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you were able to do that.
Mr.
Yeah.
Huberman, did you raise your hand to make a comment before we put the onus on Brian to give a legal opinion?
You know, I just sort of echo Tom. I mean, I think we're, you know, in for a penny and for a pound, we should proceed with this. I mean, I'm looking at changed language. We're going to have to vote on this, the city seal ordinance, because we've got changes in the language here as well. If we're going to go that far, we should go the step further, correct?
What do you say, Brian? I think
What
this
language
is
would
yes
be?
or no.
So,
you know,
so
like-
the first thing is the most important thing is that the charter allows us to do this. If you take a look at Chapter 7, Article 2, Section 7-9 and 7-10, they specifically reference Charter Section 1-1, and that specific charter section provision. The last sentence is really what matters here. It said city may have a common seal and alter the same at pleasure. So that's the most important thing, because otherwise we'd be talking about charter revision. So we've avoided that landmine. The conservative approach would be to go through the process of filing the certificate with the town clerk and then having the town clerk provide the city seal, the city seal to the Secretary of State. If that's the path that the committee wants to take, which I think is the more conservative path, I'm more than happy to fill out the certificate with Rick McQuaid's assistance and get it filed. I can't imagine that that would take very long, number one. Number two, I can't imagine that the Secretary of State would have any issue with us changing our seal, if you even want to call it that, especially when everything looks so similar. So I don't know how this would hamper the process and delay it in any way, shape, or form. In fact, I could, we would have to go to, as David correctly pointed out, go to a public hearing. At a minimum, the earliest would be August if the committee chooses to do that. It could be done in either in August or September, and then we'd have to go to Common Council after that. So at the earliest, we're looking at it either early part of September or the later part of September, early part of October would be the earliest that the city seal ordinance could be finalized if changes were to be made. And in
Okay.
that time period, we could reach out to Rick McQuaid, find out what the certificate process is, and also reach out to the Secretary of State and find out, when we file the certificate with the town clerk and the town clerk submits it to you, can we start using this seal before you approve it? Is it even an approval? Or do we just have to submit it to you? So we
Okay,
can
so
also
let's-
ask that question as well.
Nice.
Right, I'd like to ask you to do that, and I feel like we should just go through the conservative thing. Let's like spill a lot of blood on the floor for this. It seems
I
like a
just-
pretty straightforward process.
Yeah, I just want to clarify though, right? The intent here is not to, I want to be really absolutely 100% transparent that the objective here and the intent here is not to replace the traditional seal with the seal on the right-hand side, right? The traditional seal is historically significant. It is what makes Norwalk, Norwalk. And, we have always had the seal and we've used it consistently. I just want to point out that the Visit Norwalk doesn't necessarily marry well with the seal on the left, right? And so, I want to be clear that the intent for me is not to, and our department is not to replace the seal on the left with the one on the right. And I would really hate for that to happen.
No, I think
So
I think we're really clear about that. I think you have this for a limited purpose. So I think that if Brian starts like conversations with the Secretary of State and Rick McQuaid, that seems the way to go. And let's report back at our next meeting because it feels as though that's where we should go. David, you had your hand up first and then.
Just the question, I guess, and this is a question for Brian, can we utilize both?
I
Or
was
does
just
that
writing
get
that down
into
as a question. Can we have
Okay,
two seals?
Thank you.
And for different purposes, perhaps. And Mr. Livingston, you had your hand up and then we'll move on. And you're unmuted apparently.
Oh, sorry, that was essentially my question about whether we can register both, but hearing what Ms. Vonacek's saying, it doesn't even sound like this is a quote unquote seal. This is more marketing
That's
So
what I,
like putting the name, a stylized name. So I guess it's another question back to Brian. We
Yeah.
probably spent more time on this than it's worth, but if that even is being used as a quote unquote seal.
right, or just
Right,
for marketing
so-
purposes.
Right, so what I would say is, and as it pertains to this, and I think Jessica captured this in her projection here, is that the seal certifies town records. So the seal on the left, which doesn't match well with what we're talking about here, can still remain the city seal. And if we're talking about that will remain the city seal, and this other, and again, I want to clarify this, I want to look at this issue more, but my thoughts right now is, if the city seal remains the city seal, and that is the thing that Rick McQuaid and the town clerk uses to certify documents, which you can see on the projection here, to certify documents. And the other one is simply being used for the purpose that Jessica is saying, then it sounds to me like this isn't a city seal, and that the city seal will remain the city seal, and this is just a marketing seal or whatever you want to call it, but it's not the official seal. And if that's the case, that changes the analysis.
Yeah,
I
so
believe, but I'd
let's,
have to take a look at that.
yeah, that'd be great, Brenda, if you could take a look at it. It's getting late, and I know that we've got some people waiting on the tree ordinance, but it seems to me that that's the question, right? Are we really changing the seal, or are we just using something as a marketing tool? So let's report back at our next meeting in August on this matter, if we have a meeting in August, and certainly in September. So thank you so much, Jess. I know it's a lot of extra, it might take an extra couple of weeks, but let's see if we can get to an answer. And if it turns out to be marketing, then we don't even have to come back.
Absolutely. We want to, yeah, absolutely. We want to take the right way 100%, but just don't want to replace something that's the traditional seal of the city. That's all. But thank you, everybody. Thanks for hearing the presentation.
Thank you so much, Jess. And Danica, finally, you've been so patient to wait. So what we're doing now, what our last order of business tonight is to discuss chapter 112, which is the tree ordinance. And many of you know that in the month of, I guess it was the end of May, we had a planning meeting for our tree summit, which we're hoping to have sometime in September with different city groups, different conservation groups, and common council and whatnot. And so one of the things that did come out of our planning meeting for the tree summit is that we really could do with a more enlightened tree ordinance. Our tree ordinance is a pretty bare bones type of ordinance, and it was pretty much adopted so that we could be a tree city in the state of Connecticut. And we've had pretty extensive conversations with people at DPW and conservation groups that there could be a little bit more meat put on the bones of this. And so
Lisa, just to jump in real quick, Tom Keegan has returned.
Oh yes, I wanted to say Mr. Keegan returned at 8:20, I think it was. Thank you, if the minutes could reflect. So during the course of our looking at tree ordinances and trying to imagine what we would want to put in our tree ordinance, we met Danica, who will introduce herself and tell us what her new role at DEEP is in the state of Connecticut and pursuant to and actually kind of oversees our area. And then we'll spend a few minutes with Chris Torrey, who will also give us some ideas of some of the things he's thinking about adding to the tree ordinance. We haven't started drafting, but at this point, different committee members have been meeting with city officials in other cities, also with city officials here in Norwalk to imagine what we think might be good things to add. So Danica, thank you so much for your patience. We never thought that our meeting would have been this late. So we hope that you're not starving and waiting for dinner.
Oh, no, I had a nice little soup and salad while you guys were chatting. So hi, I'm Danica Jarosky. I am the Urban Forestry Coordinator for the state of Connecticut. My understanding of my role in the meeting tonight was to talk a little bit about our urban forestry program at DEEP, and then talk a little bit about some of the considerations that go into a good municipal urban forest program. So just to give you a little context, the Urban Forestry Program is housed within the Division of Forestry in the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. The purpose of the program is to advise, assist, and provide resources to municipalities, nonprofits, volunteer groups, residents that are looking to grow, maintain, and improve their urban and community forest. And we have some really wonderful documents, the Governor's Councils on Climate Change, the Forest Action Plan, both are available online that articulate a lot of the details of our program and speak specifically to our goals and objectives. What I'm going to do tonight with the few minutes I have is just give you sort of the Cliff Notes version and highlight a couple of aspects that might be useful also for your ordinance committee. So this being the urban forestry program, one of our main objectives is to maintain our existing canopy cover and to increase canopy cover, particularly in target areas. And when I say maintain existing canopy cover, I'm talking about investing resources in our mature canopy, and that might take the form of ongoing maintenance and care or structural pruning throughout a tree's life cycle, but things we can do to preserve these larger trees that proportionally provide a majority of the services rendered when we talk about all of the benefits that urban trees can provide. And that can include, forested natural areas, parks as well. And then when I talk about increasing urban tree canopy cover, we know that larger trees provide a majority of the benefits, but at the same time, we also want to invest in our future tree canopy. And a particular focus right now at DEEP is really in investing in areas that have historically been underserved. So, there's a lot of great research that's coming out right now that's highlighting the disparities that we see in things like income and, surface temperatures, urban heat island effect, and tree cover. And so we at DEEP are really working towards rectifying some of those disparities. And in fact, there was a recent TNC study some of you may have seen that actually called out Connecticut as one of the states that had the most pronounced disparities. So we have some work to do. Now, the urban forestry program doesn't do on the ground management, right? That's what the local municipalities are doing. And so to that end, another big objective of our program is to support municipalities and nonprofits and help them grow their capacity so that they can perform this great on the ground work that again is going to be maintaining and increasing our canopy cover. Since as we're working with these nonprofits and municipalities, I think another cornerstone of our program is conducting outreach and education, either directly or indirectly. So that might be through workshops and seminars, or it might be through work with some of our partner organizations like the Connecticut Forest and Parks Alliance, but effectively sort of conveying the importance of urban forestry, leveraging community support for some of our different programs. So that's sort of in a nutshell, a very, very small nutshell, what our urban forestry program is all about. I want to talk a little bit about, what that's sort of looking at the big picture state level. I want to talk a little bit about what this might look like at a municipal level. With the caveat that every municipality is incredibly distinct, and we have 169 very diverse municipalities in Connecticut. And so there's no one size fits all urban forestry program. But that said, I think there are some general tenets and principles that really are important for good urban forest management. So two of those are not just having a tree board or an advisory committee and having an ordinance. Norwalk has both. And these are standards that we have in Connecticut, but these are also national standards. Having a tree ordinance and a tree board is part of a national certification for Tree City USA, as you were mentioning. So, those tree boards are so critical. They can help really expand the capacity of the municipality. They can extend outreach, pursue funding opportunities, provide a channel for, residential concerns to municipal land managers. And then the tree ordinances are just a very important way that the individual communities can set community forest goals. And these ordinances, they can really range, they run the gamut. I think we have maybe 18 cities in Connecticut that have tree ordinances, and they can range from ordinances that are setting requirements for tree plantings to tree protection ordinances that are protecting trees of a certain size or that have historical significance, to just setting standards for tree care and maintenance. I think the aspects that go into, the components of a really strong tree ordinance are considerations of big picture. What do you have? What's your resource? What is your current urban forest canopy like? And knowing that, where do you want to go with it? And then once you know where you want to go, identifying the steps that you need to get there. And those are sort of the key components to the ordinance. Related to this idea of what do you have, another really critical component of a good urban forestry program is implementing data-driven forest management. And I think this is really often overlooked. And I think every municipality in Connecticut could benefit and would agree with me that they could benefit from having more data about where do we have trees, where do we not have trees, where we have trees, what species do we have, how big are they, what kind of condition are they in, do they need care, do they need maintenance, are they a potential hazard, and where we don't have trees, knowing where can we be planting trees, you know, what are the demographic breakdowns of these neighborhoods? How can we conduct outreach to promote tree planting in these different neighborhoods? So having that kind of data is really critical to crafting a meaningful tree ordinance, and I think also really critical to implementing any form of management. And I think it's also really useful because it's you know, we at DEEP, I mentioned, you know, some of our big picture objectives. One way we're reaching all these objectives is through a series of grant programs, which have yet to be announced, but are forthcoming. And these are really big grant opportunities that are going to be able to fund projects, urban forestry projects, to maintain and grow our urban canopy cover. And to whatever extent municipalities have existing data to illustrate and demonstrate the need and the areas of prioritization, that really goes a long way in terms of, you know, making a strong case for funding. That you know, hopefully translates to forest management. And I think from a forest management perspective, another component of a really strong urban forestry program is consideration of trees throughout their whole life cycle. So we tend to be very focused on tree planting, which is great and very exciting. But I think that tree planting is also expensive, both, you know, economically and carbon-wise, when you think about how much carbon goes into growing seedlings and transporting them and planting them. And so we want to make sure that the trees that we plant survive and are able to provide all of the services that we sort of associate with them. And so when I talk about, you know, thinking about the whole life cycle, very few municipal programs have the capacity to do things like preventative pruning or rotating pruning schedules, where you're going through and you're you know, checking your trees every couple of years to see if they need any structural pruning. But there's a lot of research that demonstrates that things like preventative pruning can make trees more wind firm, can prevent like damage in large storms. So when we're thinking about the future, we're thinking about things like climate change. We know that we're going to have more intense weather events. We're going to have, you know, more frequent storms. Storms bring down trees. You know, this is a problem because we lose the benefits of those trees. It's also a problem because it changes public perception of the urban canopy, right? You know, people shift their perspective all of a sudden of trees being this asset to being a huge disservice and to being a liability. And so I think thinking about trees throughout their whole life cycle is a really important step to minimizing that sort of big end of life cost that we end up taking on. And related to that, you know, I think another consideration is thinking about things like diversity and thinking about what types of trees are being planted. You know, certain species are going to provide more services than others. We know this. And we know that things like diversity are so critical in the wake of invasive pests and diseases, which again, you know, with climate change, we know are going to become more and more problematic. So the last sort of note that I want to mention is that I think that, and it sounds like this is something Norwalk is already doing, is there's so much power and strength that can come from collaboration and communication, not only within your own municipality, but with other municipalities as well. So I mentioned that we have some other cities with tree ordinances. Again, no tree ordinance is one size fits all. It needs to meet the needs of the individual municipality, but I think there's some helpful models and space for collaboration and you know, shared learning across these different municipalities. So that's really all I wanted to share. I guess there's probably time for questions or comments or, you know, whatever. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me in particular to touch on, but that's sort of the gist.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we've been looking at, and we're curious about what your thoughts are, is that there is a lot of talk about if you need to get canopy percentages to get a sense of, you know, whether that's the right way to go, or if you have limited funds, is an inventory the best way to go? Can you talk about the different aspects of whether you go the inventory route or the canopy route, and what those types of things tell you, and whether this is something that ought to be done periodically or before you do your tree, you know, if you could just give us a little sense of how to think about those two processes.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, first of all, for the tree cover, and I'll just mention, I think there's a lot of value in each municipality pursuing like tree cover analyses as they pertain to the specific needs of that municipality. But I'll also say that things like tree cover are things that we're thinking about a lot at the state level. We have really high resolution satellite imagery that goes up to 1 meter. And so we actually can do some pretty robust urban canopy analyses for our whole state. And that's part of our initiative that we're working towards right now at DEEP. So I think some of that is sort of like a statewide initiative that, an individual municipality doesn't necessarily have to take on. That said, I think an analysis of something like urban tree canopy cover is helpful from the perspective of seeing where you have tree cover, where you don't have tree cover. I think in particular, understanding how canopy cover is distributed, right? So we tend, you tend to get very focused on things like street trees, but for most of Connecticut, most of our urban tree canopy cover actually falls on private residential properties. And that's something that there's, the municipality perhaps doesn't have jurisdiction over right now, but I think that's where things like education and outreach can go a long way in terms of improving management on private property. And then I think, like even just understanding parks and where parks are. So I think urban tree canopy cover is helpful for big picture. Tree inventory, in my mind, can be used a lot of different ways. For one, it's really helpful in terms of keeping track of diversity and managing and mitigating the risk for invasive pests. So a lot of pests and diseases are species specific. And so having an inventory is a really, really great way that you can understand how sensitive or how vulnerable you are to an invasive pest. But it's also a really great way of keeping in check what your current diversity levels are, so that ideally those inventories should be used to inform your future future planting palettes. So like, for example, in New Haven, I think, we had like at one point, our canopy still is like 12% Norway maple. And thinking about it, right. And so, having that kind of information is just so helpful in terms of knowing, obviously we don't plant Norway maples anymore, but like, maybe we don't want to be planting a lot of maples, right? We want to be thinking about like taxonomic functional diversity. Inventories can also be particularly helpful if there is the capacity and the funding to maintain inventories as sort of like a workforce management system. And so if you're using a tree inventory to also track things like condition and to keep a track of what the overall condition is of your urban forest, but also to help inform targeted interventions in the form of like pruning or maintenance, I think that is also incredibly helpful. So there are sort of different tools used for different things. I think both are useful, and it really depends on what the goals are at the individual municipal level and the capacity, right? Like all of this stuff takes a lot of time. I will mention, and I think I did mention, that we do have funding opportunities available for these types of projects because we really want more and more municipalities to be doing this sort of data-driven forest management. So there are funding opportunities available to fund these kinds of projects.
I have one more question before I open it up to the committee, because one of the things that you mentioned to me that I found was interesting was that, as you call it, the end of life care is sort of like us humans too. The end of life care can be so expensive. But you had mentioned that there's been studies out there that says if you really come up with a good tree management policy, it actually can be less expensive if you're maintaining your forestry, your urban forestry, than to deal with the end of life. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so if I said there was specific research, I misspoke, because I actually don't know that there's specific research. Oh. I did a cursory analysis of our tree. So for those of you who don't know, Tree City USA is this program run through the Arbor Day Foundation. We have, I think 18 cities in Connecticut that meet the standards for a tree city. As part of that application, municipalities need to report how much money they're spending on tree planting, how much they're spending on maintenance and pruning, and then how much they're spending on tree removals. So what I might have mentioned to you, Lisa, is that I did a quick little mathematical, calculation to see how much our city's spending on removals versus plantings versus maintenance. And removals blows everything out on of the water, right? Removals are so incredibly expensive. And so I think that there is an economic case to be made for for doing more preventative pruning, investing more in younger trees, investing more in trees throughout their life cycle, in the hopes that that leads to better outcomes at the end of their life. And certainly there's research that shows that when you maintain a tree throughout their life cycle, their end of life outcome, they are able to persist longer, they're less of a liability. I don't know that that financial argument has been made, though I think that there's potential for exploration there, because I think that could really make a compelling case for municipalities to think about where they're spending their money.
That's great. Does anybody else, Mr. Livingston?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions on the funding opportunities you mentioned. So is that just for inventory and canopy, or are there other uses?
So there's, we actually have 3 different funding opportunities right now. 2 are funding for on the ground projects. So that would be things like tree planting, tree maintenance. And those are projects, they're urban forestry projects that are going to target climate change and environmental justice issues. So there's some specific criteria for those grants, and that's going to hopefully be announced soon. There's a 3rd grant program that's funding for just planning projects, and that can fund anything. There's lots of flexibility within that grant. The most important component of it is that there's some demonstrated need for the data, and then there's a clearly articulated plan for how that data is going to be used to inform management. So we obviously don't just want to end up with a bunch of cities doing tree inventories and then never doing anything with them. We want to know that they're going to use these inventories to pursue other grants and to get more funding to diversify their species, or pursue these projects that are actually going to lead to positive management outcomes. So the short answer there, it's not just for inventories or management plans. There is flexibility, but the important part is that the need for the data is demonstrated, as is the follow through on the management side.
Great, thanks.
Other questions? And I'd like to invite Chris and Paul or Anthony, if he's still here. If you have questions too, Danica, this is a good time to ask. Anybody else? Great. Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Danica. You were very kind to wait as late as 8:45 tonight to talk with us. We're so grateful for your time and for your expertise. We're going to turn, if you want to listen in to some of the thoughts that Chris was going to share. Chris, yeah. Tom and I have met a couple of times to talk about things that we think that might go into making our tree ordinance a little stronger. And so, Chris, I'm going to turn it over to you to share some of those ideas.
Hi, thank you, Danica. Awesome presentation. Definitely be in touch in the future and talk about some of the things that you discussed tonight. Some of the things that we discussed at the in preparation for our fall tree summit is some ordinance changes about tree protection, right? Our ordinance is kind of uniform with the state, which is very generic. It's what's mandated. We don't really go beyond that. We'd like to go beyond what's mandated, right? We want to be proactive, not reactive. And some of those things that we discussed were development. Norwalk, every municipality has development. That's how municipalities survive. But we don't do enough to protect our trees during development, like putting construction fence around the drip line of the tree, so the root structure. And honestly, in my opinion, what's below the ground is more important to the diversity and the success of a tree, as opposed to what's up top. I know we talked about some pruning to get more wind through, for the resistance, but the root system, the tree can't survive no matter what you do to the top of the tree if the bottom of the tree is failing. So that drip line, for those that don't know, is the area that the outermost edges of the tree canopy, the water that comes down. So that whole area around the tree is the root system that anchors the tree, feeds the tree, and the feeder roots can go twice as far as the drip line into someone's property or onto city property or into the road. So we do want to make a really concerted effort to protect the trees during construction and development, because in my opinion, those are what take out trees more than anything else. So that was one thing that we wanted to do. Another thing that we talked about was not having a one-for-one replacement for permits that are requested, whether it be a city tree removal or someone requesting it, or something that breaks a private property owner. We'd like a larger diameter tree to be planted, not 6 inches, a little bigger than that for sustainability. And we also don't want to do the one-for-one trade anymore, where utilities come in and they say, oh, we're going to take down a tree, and we say, oh, okay, you have to plant a tree. Well, we're saying you have to plant 10 trees when you take down a city tree. And that should be universal for us too, because we do take down more trees than we plant. And we'd like to mitigate that. And we're open to suggestions from anyone that makes sense for tree protection. I don't claim to have all the answers, no one does. But if we work together, I think that there's a lot of intelligent people on the committee and in the city. And if we work together, I think that we could do great things.
We do too. Thanks so much, Chris. Those are 2 great ideas that we're really interested to explore. Does anybody in the committee have any questions for Chris or comments about this, this topic in general? Mr. Hoovelman.
Is the right now when, because you talk about the one-for-one, Chris, do you have to plant, if you take down a tree, does the tree have to be replaced in that exact location? When you talk about adding, like, 1 for 5 or 1 for 10, can we designate another area that's perhaps tree barren that we would like to see trees, that type of thing? Or does it have to be in that same location, the way it stands right now?
You actually can't plant a tree on the same exact location.
Well, not on the
taken down. We grind our stumps, but we only grind them 6 or 10 inches under the soil. So you really can't plant in that exact spot. You can plant next to it, but no. To answer your question, Councilman Hooverman, I think that we have an asset management software called CityWorks that we track all of our tree canopy. So we know where the trees are coming down. They're not coming down in a storm where we don't know where they came down or we're being reactive. So we know every tree that we take down, every permit that comes in, every request from the residents for tree removal. So having said that, no, like if we take down 5 trees on Highland Avenue, if Highland Avenue is predominantly a tree-lined street, maybe we go to a street that has no trees. And like Danica said, is getting the residents to recognize trees as not a liability, that is as an asset. And if they don't see trees on the street, they don't know what they're missing. So we need to show the residents what they're missing and maybe do some better education on what the benefits that trees have. Not so that stuff falls on the fruit falls on my car, or I don't like doing leaves. Those are, believe it or not, those are predominantly the reasons why people request that the city take down trees. It's not because they want solar panels on their roof and they're trying to be environmentally friendly. It's because they don't want to do leaves. And they don't want the stuff falling on their house or in their gutters. And that's what we want to avoid.
Yeah, you said a key word, Chris, and I agree with that. Education. That's a big component, I think, that has to be a part of whatever we do going forward. Thank you very much for the answer.
Any questions or, oops, sorry. Now, does anybody else have any questions or comments that they'd like to share with Danica or Chris or with the committee in general about trees?
Am I allowed to ask a question? So I'm curious with this, and again, I know, these are preliminary conversations. Does Norwalk have documentation of open areas to plant? In other words, if you were to have some sort of replacement where it wasn't 1 for 1, but it was like 1 for 6 or whatever, is there good documentation for how much available space there actually is to plant these new trees?
It's a struggle. I'm sure typically we tend not to want to plant trees in the snow shelf anymore. That for many years, that was what the city did. We planted trees in the snow shelf. What we're trying to do is to get the homeowners involved and plant the trees on the other side of the sidewalk, where it's protected a little bit more. And maybe the homeowner has an active investment to make sure that it has water and to notify us. One of our policies is for those that don't know, is even if a tree is planted on private property, someday the tree, if it grows onto public property, even an inch, the city takes that tree as our tree. It's no longer your private tree, it's a city tree. So it needs a permit to remove it. You can't just remove it. And even if you said, hey, my great grandfather planted that 75 years ago, doesn't matter. It's our tree. So those are some of the things that we do now to help with that. But it's a struggle to find locations that people actually will allow us to plant on their property. And a lot of times the city right of way doesn't extend far enough onto private property to really plant, not on the tree, the snow shelf.
And just to give it a little bit of more color to what Chris said, is we have something that's called the Norwalk Tree Alliance. That is the 501c3 arm of TAC, which is our tree advisory committee. And they have been doing outreach, I guess, Paul Sotnick is here with us this evening. He is a member of the Norwalk Tree Alliance, and he can talk more about this, but we've done outreach for, I would say, decades, right? Paul, it's probably been decades. You want to give a little bit of color to that to Danica? She may well have a comment that could be helpful to us.
Yeah, between the education work that we've done from the Tree Advisory Committee with the various programs we've had, including our Arbor Day celebrations that we've had with the schools, we've gone out through the Tree Alliance and done other educational activities through open houses and things like that. So we've done a variety of different educational activities between the Tree Advisory Committee as well as the Tree Alliance as the 501c3 arm.
So that's a big focus for a lot of the conservation groups right now in Norwalk, is to maybe expand that outreach. No doubt about it. All right, it's 9 o'clock. I'm conscious of the fact that I've held everybody for 2 hours and it's been a long meeting. Are there any other comments that people would like to make before I entertain a motion to adjourn? Seeing none, is there a motion to adjourn? Dominique, you got it. All right, well, thank you very much. And a special thanks to Danica. I mean, you really had to wait us out tonight. I'm so sorry that we had such a full agenda, but it was really super helpful to have you here this evening. And Chris, you too, you had a long wait to join us, as well as Paul. So thank you very much. We'll come back to everybody with maybe language starting next month, start working through our tree ordinance, and would love to have feedback from Danica and Chris and others experts in this field. So thanks, everybody. Have a nice evening and get a good supper.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a
Bye,
good night.
everybody. Thank you.
Take care. Have a good night.
Good night. Thanks, Brian.